When the woman of his dreams disappears, Marley is left to face a hard reality. Welcome, beautiful soul, to Threads of Grace. I'm glad you stopped by. Marley had always believed he could endure disappointment. He'd learned how. But this was different. This was hope introduced, and then withdrawn without explanation. And his body responded the way his heart refused to admit it had been wounded. It convulsed with sudden rapid irregular beats, and a shivering chill that had nothing to do with the temperature around him trickled across his skin. Are you ready to learn more? Whether you're listening in the quiet of the morning, on a long drive, or in the middle of a season where you're searching for clarity, you belong here. Expect that this story will stir your spirit and gently point you to God. This is Threads of Grace, where faith meets story, and every life is beautifully stitched with purpose. Be sure to like and subscribe. Marley Fannigan learned the sound of silence early. It lived in the half-finished houses he worked on, between the echo of his boots on concrete floors and the hum of machinery winding down at dusk. It followed him home, too, settling into the modest apartment where his lunch pail sat by the door and his Bible rested on the kitchen table, spine worn, pages softened by years of honest use. At 36, Marley was strong in ways the world could see and steady in ways it rarely noticed. His hands were calloused from framing walls and pouring foundations, his shoulders broad from years of lifting what others hesitated to carry. But it was his faith, quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal, that shaped him most. Every morning before sunrise, Marley sat in his truck at the edge of the job site, steam rising from his coffee as he read a psalm or a proverb. He didn't rush those moments. He believed God met him there, between the smell of sawdust and the promise of a new day. Faith for Marley wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It simply guided his steps. Still, there was a longing he couldn't quite silence. Most of the men he worked with talked about their wives, their girlfriends, or the complications that came with both. Marley listened, nodded, and smiled when appropriate. He was happy for them, truly. But as the conversations faded into laughter or complaints, he often felt like he was standing just outside a door he hoped God would one day open. He wanted partnership, not just romance, but purpose. Someone who understood that faith wasn't a weekend obligation, but a daily walk. Someone who would pray with him when work was scarce and rejoice with him when it was plenty. Someone who could stand beside him, not behind or ahead, as they built a life rooted in something unshakable. Church was where Marley felt both closest to God and most aware of his singleness. On Sundays, he sat 2 rows from the back, close enough to engage, but far enough to observe. Families filled the pews, children whispering, couples leaning into one another, hands clasped during prayer. Marley sang the hymns, bowed his head, and lifted his hands when the Spirit moved him. Yet sometimes, during the final prayer, his eyes opened just long enough to notice the empty space beside him. "Trust my timing," he reminded himself, words he had prayed so often they felt etched into his bones. After service, he lingered less than he used to. Not out of bitterness, just wisdom. He knew comparison was a thief, and today he wanted peace more than questions. So he slipped out quietly, nodding to the ushers, exchanging brief pleasantries, and stepping back into the cool air of the parking lot. That afternoon, Marley took a long walk through the neighborhood near his apartment. Construction sites dotted the area, some his, some belonging to other crews. He liked walking past unfinished buildings. They reminded him that incomplete didn't mean broken. It meant becoming. As he walked, Marley prayed, not for a wife by name, but for readiness. For patience. For discernment. He asked God to shape him into the kind of man who could love well, lead gently, and listen deeply. If partnership was coming, he wanted to meet it whole, not hollow. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. Marley paused, resting his hands on his hips, breathing in the evening air. Somewhere between the ache in his muscles and the quiet hope in his chest, he felt it again, the sense that his story wasn't stalled, just unfolding. He didn't know who she was yet. He didn't know when they would meet. But Marley Fannigan kept walking, steadfast in his faith, open in his heart, trusting that the same God who helped him build strong foundations in concrete was also, patiently and precisely, building something lasting in his life. Marley cut through the park on his way home, choosing the longer path without really knowing why. The air was softer there, the noise of the street replaced by the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath his boots and the low murmur of people unwinding at the end of the day. A few joggers passed him. A father pushed a stroller. Somewhere nearby, a radio played faint gospel music, tinny but sincere. He slowed near a bench shaded by an old oak tree. That's when he noticed her. She sat cross-legged on the grass with a paperback open in her lap, hair pulled back loosely, as if she hadn't planned to be anywhere important. Every so often she paused, looking up as if the words had stirred a thought she needed to finish in her mind before continuing. There was an ease about her, unhurried, grounded, that caught Marley off guard. He told himself to keep walking. Instead, his feet stopped. The moment stretched just long enough for her to glance up and meet his eyes. She smiled first, not polite, not cautious, just warm. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Marley replied, surprised at how natural it felt. He gestured lightly toward the book. "Any good?" She held it up. "Depends on the day, I think. Today it's hitting." Marley nodded. "Those are the best kind." She laughed softly and closed the book, marking her place with a finger. "You come here often?" "More than I realize," he admitted. "It's quieter than my neighborhood. Feels unfinished in a good way." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's an interesting way to describe a park." He shrugged. "Occupational hazard. I work construction. I see potential everywhere." "That explains the boots," she said, glancing down. "I was wondering if you were about to fix the bench." Marley chuckled. "Only if it breaks while I'm standing here." She shifted slightly, angling her body toward him. "I'm Naomi." "Marley," he said. "Nice to meet you." They fell into conversation easily, about the park, the neighborhood, the way the city changed block by block. Naomi told him she liked coming there to read and pray when her apartment felt too small for her thoughts. That word, pray, landed gently but firmly in Marley's chest. "You don't hear people say that as casually anymore," he said. She smiled, not defensive, just honest. "Faith's part of my everyday. I try not to tuck it away." Marley felt something loosen inside him. "Same here," he said quietly. "It guides more than I let on." They talked about church, not which one, just what it meant to them. About patience. About learning to wait without growing bitter. Marley surprised himself by how open he felt, how little he filtered his words. Naomi listened without interrupting, eyes attentive, like she believed what he said mattered. As the sky dimmed and the park lights flickered on, Naomi glanced at her watch. "I should head out," she said, standing and brushing grass from her jeans. "But I'm really glad you stopped." "Me too," Marley said. And he meant it. They lingered a second longer than necessary. "Maybe I'll see you here again," she said. "I hope so," he replied. As she walked away, Marley didn't feel the usual ache of wanting more too fast. Instead, there was peace, quiet, steady, and unfamiliar in the best way. He resumed his walk home, heart lighter than it had been in a long time. For the first time in a while, Marley didn't feel like he was walking alone. He felt like he'd just stepped onto a new path. The weight carried in like it usually did the next morning. Project managers barked orders over the clatter of machinery, voices sharp with deadlines and pressure. Schedules shifted without warning. One crew complained about supplies. Another moved like the day had already beaten them. Someone cursed the weather. Someone else cursed the plans. The job site buzzed with the kind of chaos that seeped into a man's bones if he let it. Marley felt it, he always did. By mid-morning, dust clung to his skin and sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. The air smelled like concrete and impatience. A foreman snapped at him for a measurement that had already been double-checked. Two younger guys argued over whose responsibility it was to clean up a mess neither wanted to own. Marley said little. Instead, he hummed. Low at first, almost instinctive, "Great is thy faithfulness." The melody rose and fell with the rhythm of his work. When the noise grew louder, he switched hymns without thinking, letting blessed assurance carry him through the repetition of lifting, aligning, securing. His co-workers had learned not to comment on it. Some smirked. Some ignored it. One or two, on especially rough days, seemed to stand a little closer to him than necessary. The hymns weren't for show. They were anchors. Each note reminded Marley who he was when everything around him tried to reduce him to productivity and patience quotas. Faith steadied his hands when frustration tempted him to rush. It softened his responses when sarcasm would have been easier. Humming kept his spirit from absorbing the bitterness floating through the site like dust. During lunch, the complaints came heavier. "Man, they expect us to kill ourselves for this job," someone muttered. "I'm doing just enough not to get fired," another replied. Marley chewed quietly, eyes distant, Naomi's smile from the park flickering through his thoughts like a quiet promise. He didn't preach. He didn't correct. He simply stood when break ended and went back to work with the same steady pace he always had. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across unfinished walls. The noise softened. Orders slowed. Exhaustion replaced agitation. Marley finished securing the last beam, wiped his hands on his jeans, and let out a slow breath. As he walked toward his truck, he caught himself humming again, this time softer, almost grateful. The chaos hadn't changed. The workload hadn't eased. The people were still people. But Marley was different. Faith had carried him through another day, just as it always did, quietly, faithfully, humming hope into the noise until sanity and peace held their ground. That evening, Marley drove across town to visit his grandmother. Monday nights were their nights, something they had settled into years ago without ever naming it a ritual. No matter how busy work got, or how tired his body felt, Marley showed up. Faith had taught him consistency, but his grandmother, Miss Lillian, had lived it. The house was quiet when he arrived, porch light already on as if she'd been expecting him all day. He let himself in with the spare key, the familiar creak of the door greeting him like an old friend. "Grandma," he called gently. "In here, baby," her voice answered, thin but warm. She sat in her recliner by the window, a knitted blanket draped over her legs, television low and forgotten. Illness had slowed her, thinned her frame, but her eyes still carried that same sharp kindness that had raised him when life demanded more than his parents could give. Marley bent to kiss her cheek. "How you feeling tonight?" She smiled. "Blessed enough to see you walk through that door." "That's how I'm feeling." He chuckled softly and moved to the kitchen, warming the soup he'd brought, cutting fruit just the way she liked it. When he returned, he pulled a chair close and sat facing her, like he always did. Mondays weren't rushed. They were meant to be savored. They talked about simple things at first, the weather, the neighbors, a show she half-watched. Then, as the silence settled comfortably between them, she studied him a little longer than usual. "You're humming again," she said. Marley paused. "I didn't even realize." "You always do when your heart's full or your mind's busy," she said. "Which one is it tonight?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe both." Her eyes softened. "Tell me." Marley leaned back, hands folded. "I met someone. Just conversation. Nothing rushed. But it felt different. Monday nights had always been honest nights between them. No pretending. No skipping over the important parts." His grandmother nodded slowly. "Different can be God's way of whispering instead of shouting." "I'm trying not to get ahead of him," Marley said. "I want to walk this right." She reached out, resting her hand over his. Her grip was weaker than it used to be, but her certainty hadn't faded. Love rooted in faith doesn't need to be chased. If it's meant, it will walk beside you. They sat there quietly after that, the room filled with the gentle hum of the heater and the unspoken understanding between generations. Marley prayed silently, thanking God for time, for wisdom, for moments that mattered more than he ever realized while living them. When it was time to leave, his grandmother held his hand a second longer. "Monday nights," she said softly. "Don't ever let life steal what grounds you." "I won't," Marley promised. As he stepped back into the night, the weight of the day still lingered, but it felt lighter now, balanced by love, legacy, and a quiet hope unfolding right on time. Tuesday morning came with a restlessness Marley couldn't explain. He stood in his kitchen longer than usual, lunch pail open on the counter, eggs still in the carton, bread untouched. The rhythm that normally guided him, coffee brewing, skillet heating, scripture playing softly from his phone, felt off. Not wrong, just interrupted. He closed the lunch pail. "I'll grab something on the way," he muttered, surprising himself. Marley didn't do breakfast out. It was an unnecessary expense, an inefficient habit. But that morning, something nudged him toward the corner deli, a narrow storefront he passed daily and never entered. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him, thick with the smell of fresh rolls, frying eggs, and coffee that had been brewing since before dawn. A couple of regulars leaned against the counter, arguing good-naturedly about sports. Marley scanned the menu board, still half convinced he'd turn around and leave. "Next!" He stepped forward and froze. Naomi stood behind the counter, apron tied loosely around her waist, hair pulled back in the same effortless way he remembered from the park. She looked up, already smiling at the customer in front of him. Then her eyes met his. For a split second, surprise flickered across her face. Then that same warm smile spread, slower this time, more intentional. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "this feels familiar." Marley let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Guess I followed the wrong routine today." "Or the right one," she replied. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't know you worked here." "Just mornings," Naomi said. "I help my uncle out a few days a week. Park reading is the reward after." The man ahead of Marley took his sandwich and left, and suddenly it was just the two of them, the noise of the deli fading into background hum. "What can I get you?" she asked, playful but professional. Marley glanced up at the board, then back at her. "Whatever's good. I'm trusting you." She laughed. "Dangerous choice." "Feels like one of those days," he said. As she prepared the sandwich, they talked in short, easy bursts about work schedules, early mornings, and how strange it was to run into someone again so soon. There was no pressure in it, no awkwardness. Just a growing sense that this moment, like the last, was meant to be unhurried. Naomi slid the wrapped sandwich across the counter. "On the house," she said. Marley frowned. "I can't." "You can," she interrupted gently. "Call it an early morning blessing." He nodded. Her kindness touched him more than he wanted to admit. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, she added, "I get off at 5 today. I usually walk through the park after." Marley smiled, heart steady but hopeful. "I might be there." He stepped back into the morning light, breakfast warm in his hands, faith humming quietly in his chest. For the second day in a row, Marley realized something simple but profound. Sometimes God changed your routine, not to disrupt your life, but to introduce you to it. 5 o'clock could not come soon enough for Marley. The day dragged in a way it never did when his mind was clear. Every glance at his watch felt like a small act of defiance against time itself. The job site moved at its usual pace, too fast for mistakes, too slow for anticipation, but Marley felt caught somewhere in between, working on instinct while his thoughts drifted ahead to the park. He tried to focus. He really did. But every beam he measured, every nail he set, Naomi's smile found a way back in. Not loud, not distracting, just present, like a melody he couldn't stop humming under his breath. "Fannigan, you good?" one of the guys called out. "Yeah," Marley answered quickly. "All good." And he was. Better than good. Grounded, even. But excitement had a way of making patience feel heavier than lumber. He caught himself humming again, "This time guide me, O thou great Jehovah," the words threading through his spirit as the afternoon sun beat down. Faith reminded him not to rush the moment ahead. Anticipation was a gift, not something to wrestle into submission. At 4:45, the foreman finally called time. Marley cleaned up faster than usual, hands moving with purpose but not carelessness. He washed the dust from his face, changed his shirt in the truck, and sat for a brief moment with the engine off. He prayed, short, honest. "God, I'm grateful. Help me show up as myself." Then he drove. The park looked different at that hour. Softer. The light slanted through the trees just right, catching the edges of leaves and turning them gold. Marley parked, stepped out, and let the quiet settle him. Whatever happened next, he didn't want to arrive hurried in spirit. He spotted Naomi near the same oak tree as before, this time standing, stretching as if she'd just finished a long day too. She noticed him at the same moment, her face lighting up in recognition. "You made it," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," Marley replied. They fell into step beside each other, walking the path without needing to decide a direction. Conversation flowed easily, about her morning at the deli, his long day on site. The small ways life surprised them when they stopped rushing through it. There were pauses too. Comfortable ones. The kind that didn't need filling. As they reached the far end of the path, Naomi slowed and looked at him. "You know," she said, "I don't usually believe in coincidence." Marley smiled, thoughtful. "Me neither." The sun dipped lower, the sky deepening into hues of promise and rest. And as they continued walking, Marley felt it again, that quiet certainty that this moment, this timing, this meeting, was unfolding exactly as it should. And somehow it felt like the beginning of something far greater than a date. They met there each day after work for the remainder of the week. It wasn't planned with words or promises, just an understanding that settled between them as naturally as evening did after day. By 5 o'clock, Marley's steps always turned toward the park, and Naomi was always there, waiting or arriving just moments after him, as if time itself had learned to cooperate. Each day unfolded its own quiet lesson. On Wednesday, Marley took Naomi down to the old pier just past the park, where the boards creaked underfoot and the water carried stories in its movement. He brought 2 fishing rods, one well-worn, the other borrowed but carefully cleaned. "I should warn you," he said, handing her the rod. "Fishing teaches patience before it teaches success." Naomi smiled, rolling the line between her fingers. "I'm good with patience." He showed her how to cast, guiding her hands without hovering, explaining just enough and then stepping back. They talked while they waited, about childhood memories, about prayers that had gone unanswered and ones that had come in unexpected ways. When Naomi finally felt the tug on the line, her laugh rang out across the water, unrestrained and full. "I think it likes me," she said. Marley laughed too, joy rising easy and genuine. "Looks like it." They didn't catch much that day, but it didn't matter. They sat at the edge of the pier until the sky faded, lines still, hearts full. On Thursday, Naomi came prepared. She met him in the park with a folded kite tucked under her arm, bright against the dimming sky. "I figured it was my turn," she said. Marley raised an eyebrow. "I haven't flown a kite since I was a kid." "Perfect," Naomi replied. "You'll remember." They found an open stretch of grass where the wind moved freely. She showed him how to let the line go slowly, how to trust the wind instead of fighting it. The kite climbed, wobbled, dipped, and then steadied, soaring high above them. Marley watched it dance against the sky, something childlike and reverent stirring in him. "Feels like faith," he said without thinking. "Letting go but staying connected." Naomi glanced at him, surprised, then smiled. "Exactly." They took turns running, laughing when the kite dipped too low, celebrating when it rose again. As dusk settled, they lay back on the grass, watching the string disappear into the sky. By Friday, their routine felt earned. They walked. They talked. Sometimes they prayed, quietly, not performatively, asking God for wisdom, for clarity, for hearts that moved at his pace, not their own. There was no rush. No pressure. Just two people learning each other through small, sacred moments, shared evenings, borrowed hobbies, and the gentle unfolding of trust. By the end of the week, Marley realized something profound. They weren't just filling time. They were building something slow, intentional, and grounded in faith, one ordinary evening at a time. The following Sunday, Marley invited Naomi to church. He didn't make a speech about it. No pressure. Just an easy, honest invitation as they walked the park path the evening before. "I go to a small church on the east side," he said. "It's home for me. You're welcome to join, no expectations." Naomi smiled. "I'd like that." Sunday morning, Marley arrived early like he always did. Same pew. Same quiet nods to the ushers. Same rhythm. At church, he was known as a man of few words, never rushing to the microphone, never forcing conversation, but unmistakably present. He stacked chairs when needed, fixed what was loose, prayed when asked. People trusted him because he showed up, week after week, steady as a cornerstone. When Naomi walked in beside him, the room shifted. Not loudly. Not disruptively. Just noticeably. Her presence carried light. She greeted people with warmth that didn't feel performative, her smile easy, her laughter gentle but sincere. She listened intently, leaned in when others spoke, and responded with joy that felt rooted rather than flashy. It didn't take long before heads turned, not out of curiosity alone, but because something about her invited connection. Marley noticed, standing quietly at her side. During worship, Naomi sang freely, hands lifted without hesitation. Marley watched her for a moment before turning his eyes forward again, humbled. Her faith was expressive where his was reserved, but it wasn't foreign. It was complementary. When the pastor preached about obedience that didn't need applause, Marley felt Naomi glance at him and smile, as if she understood something about him without needing it explained. After service, people lingered longer than usual. "Who's your friend?" someone asked Marley. He answered simply, "Naomi." But Naomi, she remembered names. Asked questions. Laughed easily. Within minutes, she was surrounded by conversation, drawing people in not by trying to impress, but by being fully present with whoever stood in front of her. Later, as they walked out together, Marley felt something settle deep in his spirit. She didn't overshadow him. She didn't pull him away from who he was. She fit, like light through a window that had always been there, just waiting. Outside, Naomi slipped her hands into her coat pockets and exhaled. "I like your church," she said. "It feels faithful." Marley smiled, slow and thoughtful. "It is." They walked to their cars in comfortable silence, the sound of hymns still echoing faintly in their minds. For Marley, church had always been a place of grounding. That morning it became a place of possibility. And he thanked God, not loudly, not publicly, but with the quiet certainty of a man who knew when grace was unfolding right in front of him. Later that afternoon, they returned to the park, the quiet settling around them like a familiar prayer. The oak tree cast long shadows now, and the sounds of Sunday laughter drifted in and out with the breeze. Naomi slowed her steps. "There's something I want you to understand about where I am spiritually," she said, her tone thoughtful, not defensive. Marley turned toward her fully. "I'm listening." "I'm sort of in between churches," she explained. "I moved here recently, and I didn't want to rush into a new place just to feel settled. My old church was home for a long time, and leaving it, I needed space to listen again. Marley nodded, patient. For the past month, Naomi continued, Sunday mornings have been at the food pantry. That's where I serve, stocking shelves, talking with people, praying when they ask. In the afternoons, I come here. I sit, I read, I pray. This park has been my sanctuary. She paused, watching his reaction. Marley didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly. Sounds like you've been meeting God just fine. Her eyes softened. I think so too. I just want my next church to be somewhere I'm led, not somewhere I land out of habit. I respect that, Marley said. Faith shouldn't be rushed. They stood quietly for a moment, the weight of the week lifting as the day waned. Naomi glanced at him. Thank you for inviting me this morning. I really did enjoy it. I'm glad, Marley replied. And whenever you're ready, you're always welcome. As they continued walking, Marley felt an unexpected gratitude settle in his chest. Naomi's faith wasn't performative or confined, it was active, intentional, and alive. It showed up in service, in stillness, and in the courage to wait. He realized then that faith, much like love, didn't need to be forced into place. It unfolded, patiently, faithfully, one step at a time. Monday came again, and with it Grandma's house. Marley parked in the same spot he always did, porch light already glowing against the early evening sky. Some things didn't change, and he was grateful for that. He grabbed the familiar grocery bag from the passenger seat and let himself in, the soft creak of the door announcing him before he spoke. Hey, Grandma. I hear you, she called from the living room. Come on in, baby. She was propped up in her recliner, thinner than she used to be, but her eyes were sharp, watching him the way only someone who had helped raise you could. Marley set the bag down, moved with ease through the kitchen, and started his routine, warming soup, refilling her water, checking her medications against the list taped inside the cabinet. Monday nights were sacred. No rushing. No pretending. He pulled a chair close and sat facing her, and before she said a word, she smiled. You're different, she said. Marley chuckled. That obvious? I've known you since you were in diapers, she replied. Joy sits on you when something good is happening. He exhaled slowly. I've been spending time with someone. Her eyes lit up, not surprised, just pleased. I knew it. Marley shook his head, smiling. Her name's Naomi. We met in the park. It's been easy. Intentional. Grandma nodded, listening closely. Does she love the Lord? She does, Marley answered without hesitation. Deeply. In her own way. That's the best kind, she said. Faith that's lived, not just spoken. Marley leaned back, thinking about Sunday, about the pantry, the park, the pew. She's not rushing anything. Neither am I. Grandma reached for his hand, her grip gentle but steady. That tells me everything I need to know. They sat quietly for a moment, the hum of the clock filling the space. I don't know where this is going yet, Marley said softly. Grandma smiled. You don't need to. God reveals the path one step at a time. When it was time to leave, Marley hugged her carefully, holding on just a second longer than usual. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Always, he said. As Marley stepped back into the night, the week ahead felt full, not rushed, not heavy, just promising. And for the first time in a long while, Monday didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the continuation of a prayer already being answered. Tuesday rolled in with a heartache Marley hadn't prepared for. The workday passed in a blur. The noise of the site felt faint as Marley looked forward to spending his evening with Naomi. By 5 o'clock, he was already at the park, but after an hour's wait Naomi hadn't shown up. He told himself not to read into it. People had lives. Schedules changed. Still, he chose their usual path, the one that curved toward the oak tree, the one where she always appeared just as the sun began to soften. Naomi wasn't there. Marley sat on the bench instead, watching the path with quiet patience. Minutes passed. Then in another hour. Families came and went. Joggers looped past. A kite lifted into the sky and dipped again, tugging at something in his chest. He stayed. He walked the length of the park twice, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning without trying to look like he was scanning. He paused near the pier, listening to the water lap against the boards. He hummed soft, almost inaudible now, but the tune felt heavier, like it carried questions he hadn't meant to ask yet. He waited. 3 hours passed. Naomi never showed. By the time the sky darkened and the park lights flickered on, Marley's hope had thinned into something quieter and more fragile. Not disappointment exactly, something closer to grief for a rhythm that had come to mean more than he'd realized. He sat back down, staring at the empty space beside him. "Lord," he prayed silently, "help me not to assume." He stayed a little longer anyway, because leaving felt too final. When he finally stood, his steps were slower, weighted by the absence he couldn't explain. As Marley walked back to his truck, he reminded himself of what Faith had taught him again and again. Not every silence is rejection. Not every delay is loss. Still, as he drove home, the ache lingered. And for the first time since meeting Naomi, the park felt unfinished in a way that hurt. Wednesday brought the same disappointment. Marley showed up at the park just after 5, earlier than usual, as if arriving sooner might somehow change the outcome. The sun was still high, the air warm, the paths busy, but the space that had come to feel familiar was empty again. No Naomi. He paced this time, unable to settle. He checked his phone once, then slipped it back into his pocket, ashamed of the hope he hadn't wanted to admit was there. An hour passed. Then another. The light shifted, the crowd thinned, and still nothing. By the second evening of absence, doubt found its opening. Maybe he had been too quiet. Too predictable. Too serious. Marley sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. He replayed conversations he'd thought were meaningful, now wondering if they had sounded dull. Had he talked too much about Faith? Had his steadiness felt like stiffness? Had his silence come across as a lack of interest rather than respect? He exhaled slowly, a familiar ache tightening his chest. Too spiritual, he muttered under his breath, the words tasting bitter. He'd heard them before, not always spoken but implied. Faith had cost him connections in the past, had made him seem out of step in a world that moved faster than conviction. The park lights flickered on, and Marley realized he was humming again, but this time the hymn felt more like a plea than a comfort. "Search me, O God." He stopped himself. Faith wasn't the problem, but loneliness had a way of whispering lies that sounded almost reasonable. As he stood to leave, Marley forced himself to straighten his shoulders. He had always believed that showing up, being consistent, being honest was enough. Tonight, doubt pressed hard against that belief. Still, he whispered a prayer into the quiet. "God, if I misstepped, show me. And if I didn't, help me trust you anyway." He walked back to his truck alone again, the path darker now, the joy of earlier days replaced by questions he hadn't asked God in a long time. And yet, somewhere beneath the disappointment, Marley held on. Not to Naomi. Not to the park. But to the faith that had carried him long before she ever entered his story. Even when it hurt. By Thursday morning, it had been 3 days since Marley had last seen Naomi, and his body had begun to keep score. He woke before his alarm, throat dry, stomach tight, a dull ache settling behind his eyes. At first he blamed it on the long hours, the dust, the changing weather. But even as he sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, he knew better. This wasn't just physical. He dragged himself through his routine, slower now. The coffee tasted off. The familiar psalms didn't land the way they usually did. By the time he reached the job site, his chest felt heavy, his breath shallow, like grief had taken up residence where peace normally lived. "Man, you don't look right," one of the guys said. "I'm good," Marley replied automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. He worked anyway. Lifted when he should have rested. Pushed when his body asked for pause. But by midday, nausea rolled in waves, forcing him to sit longer than usual during break. The hymns wouldn't come this time. Silence filled the space where they normally lived. It scared him. Marley had always believed he could endure disappointment. He'd learned how. But this was different. This was hope introduced, and then withdrawn without explanation. And his body responded the way his heart refused to admit it had been wounded. It convulsed with sudden, rapid, irregular beats. A shivering chill that had nothing to do with the temperature around him trickled across his skin. After work, habit pulled him toward the park again, even though his legs ached and his head throbbed. He stood at the entrance for a long moment, then turned away. He couldn't take another empty bench. At home, he collapsed onto the couch, feverish now, staring at the ceiling as the room dimmed. His phone sat untouched on the table. He hadn't asked for her number. Hadn't rushed anything. Now he wondered if caution had cost him connection. "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "I don't understand this." His body curled inward, exhaustion finally overtaking him. As sleep came in broken fragments, one thought pressed heavier than the rest. He hadn't just lost sight of Naomi. He had lost his footing, and he needed God to steady him again before the ache consumed more than his strength. Friday morning found Marley moving on fumes. His body felt hollow, sick, weak, and sharply aware of every missed meal. Still, his feet carried him where his heart had been circling for days, the deli. He didn't expect answers. He barely expected relief. He just needed something warm, something grounding. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Naomi wasn't there. The realization hit harder than he expected. The counter felt longer. The room quieter. Marley took a seat anyway, resting his forearms on the cool surface, willing his stomach to settle. He stared at the menu without reading it, disappointment folding into the fatigue already clinging to him. "Morning," a voice said. An older man stood behind the counter, broad-shouldered, graying beard, eyes observant in a way that missed very little. "You all right, son?" the man asked. Marley nodded faintly. "Yeah, just. Not feeling great." The man studied him another second, then asked almost casually, "You wouldn't happen to be Marley, would you?" Marley looked up, surprised. "Yeah, that's me." The man's expression softened with recognition. "I thought so. Naomi mentioned you." That single sentence landed like a steadying hand on Marley's chest. "She did?" he asked, careful to keep his voice even. The man nodded, already turning to the grill. "I'm her uncle. She talked about meeting you in the park. Said you were kind. Steady." Marley swallowed, throat tight. He hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear that. "She hasn't been in this week," the uncle continued. "Family matter. Took her out of town unexpectedly." "Oh," Marley said quietly. The ache in his chest shifted, still there but different now. Not rejection. Not regret. Just absence. "She asked me to keep an eye out for you if you came by," the uncle added over his shoulder. "Said you might." Marley let out a slow breath he hadn't known he was holding. The uncle slid a sandwich and a mug of tea across the counter. "Thank you," Marley said, meaning more than just the food. As he ate, warmth spreading through his body at last, Marley felt something settle back into place. He hadn't imagined their connection. He hadn't overstepped. He hadn't been too dull, too quiet, too faithful. Sometimes people disappeared not because of disinterest, but because life demanded their attention elsewhere. And faith, Marley reminded himself, was often exercised in the waiting. When he stood to leave, the uncle nodded toward him. "She'll be back soon." Marley didn't ask when. He didn't press for more. He simply nodded, heart steadier now, trusting that what was unfolding didn't require his force, only his faith. As Marley folded the wrapper and pushed the empty mug aside, he reached for his wallet, instinct more than intention. The uncle waved him off. "Don't worry about it." Marley hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. Really." The older man leaned against the counter, studying Marley with a look that felt less like scrutiny and more like care. After a moment, he reached beneath the register, pulled out a small slip of paper, and slid it across the counter. Marley glanced down but didn't touch it. "That's Naomi's number," the uncle said plainly. Marley looked up, surprised. "I don't want to overstep. I didn't ask her." "She told me about you," the uncle interrupted gently. "About the park. The walks. The pier. She said you were respectful. Didn't rush. Didn't press." Marley swallowed. "She also said," the uncle continued, lowering his voice, "that she hoped you wouldn't think her silence meant disinterest." Marley finally picked up the paper, his fingers unsteady. "She's okay." "She is," the uncle said. "Just tending to something that matters. She didn't want to explain over text until she could do it right." That sounded like Naomi. "I wouldn't give this to you if I thought you'd misuse it," the uncle added. "But some people. You can tell they know how to hold things carefully." Marley nodded slowly, emotion pressing close to the surface. "I'll be careful," he said. "I promise." The uncle smiled, then small, satisfied. "I figured you would." Marley stood, tucking the paper into his pocket like something sacred, not to be rushed or fumbled. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Please tell her I came by," he said. "Oh, I will," the uncle replied. "And son?" "Yes, sir. Sometimes silence isn't distance. It's just life asking for patience." Marley stepped outside into the morning light, the air cool against his face. His body still felt weak, but his spirit felt steadier than it had in days. He didn't pull out his phone right away. He walked to his truck first. Saturday. Breathed. Prayed. Only then did he take out the slip of paper, look at the number, and whisper a quiet thank you, not just for the connection, but for the kind of faith that knew when to wait. And when to reach out. His body demanded rest, and for once he listened. He slept in long stretches, woke only to sip tea, eat small meals, and sit quietly with his Bible open on his chest. The house was still, the kind of stillness that didn't accuse him of laziness but invited healing. He didn't text Naomi. Not yet. He wanted his strength to return before his words did. By Sunday morning, he felt it, a little steadiness returning to his limbs, a little clarity in his head. It took effort, but he got dressed. Church didn't feel optional that morning. It felt necessary. Not for appearances, not out of habit, but because his spirit needed reminding of who had carried him through the week when his body could not. He arrived later than usual, slipping into the back pew, breath shallow but resolved. The sanctuary felt warmer than he remembered. Familiar hymns filled the air, and for the first time in days Marley sang not loudly but fully. Marley was halfway through the final opening hymn when he sensed movement beside him. Not noise, just presence. Someone slid into the pew next to him with quiet familiarity, careful not to disrupt the moment. Marley kept his eyes forward at first, finishing the line he was singing, steadying his breath the way he always did. Then he glanced sideways. Naomi. For a heartbeat he forgot the words. She sat there as if she'd always belonged in that space, Bible already open, hair pulled back neatly, eyes lifted toward the front with reverence and calm. When she turned and noticed him looking, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, equal parts apology and warmth. Marley swallowed hard, emotion rushing faster than his still-recovering body could fully manage. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, afraid that if he spoke, his voice might betray how close he was to tears. During the prayer, Naomi leaned slightly toward him and whispered, just enough for him to hear, "I'm sorry I disappeared." He shook his head gently. Later, he mouthed. She nodded, grateful. They worshipped side by side, their shoulders almost touching, the space between them charged not with tension, but with relief. Marley felt his strength returning, not just physically, but spiritually, like God was stitching together something that had frayed during the week. When the service ended and the congregation stood, Naomi didn't rush to speak. She waited until the final amen settled into silence. "I wanted to surprise you," she said softly. "You did," Marley replied, voice low, steady but thick. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again." Her expression softened. "I didn't want you to worry. I had to leave town suddenly, family health situation. I didn't trust myself to explain it quickly or clearly. But I thought about you. Every day." Marley nodded, understanding settling in where doubt had lived. "Your uncle filled me in. Gave me your number." She smiled. "I figured he might." They walked out of the sanctuary together, sunlight spilling through the doors, the sound of greetings and laughter surrounding them. Naomi paused just outside, turning to face him fully now. "I wasn't ready to let go of what we started," she said. "I just needed to tend to something important." Marley met her gaze, steady, sincere. "I'm glad you did. And I'm glad you're here." She glanced back toward the sanctuary, then back at him. "Mind if I sit with you again next week too?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd ask." They stood there a moment longer, neither rushing away, faith and timing aligning once more. And as Naomi slipped her arm lightly through his, Marley felt certain of something simple and profound. This was worth the waiting. Their relationship grew quietly but steadily. What started as shared walks and early evenings unfolded into late-night phone calls that stretched longer than either of them intended. Marley would lie back against his pillows, phone pressed to his ear, listening to Naomi's voice soften as the day released its hold on her. They talked about everything and nothing, her family, his grandmother, moments of doubt, moments of gratitude. Sometimes they prayed together. Sometimes they just listened to each other breathe. Afternoon texts became their unspoken rhythm. "Did you eat today? This reminded me of you. Park later?" Nothing dramatic. Nothing forced. Just presence, consistent and kind. Marley felt something settle in his spirit over those weeks. Not urgency. Not fear. Certainty. He wasn't chasing a feeling anymore. He was responding to one that had proven itself faithful. One night, during their usual bedtime call, the conversation slowed naturally, like it always did when sleep crept close. "You sound tired," Naomi said softly. "Long day," Marley replied. "Good one, though." They sat in comfortable silence for a few seconds, the kind that no longer needed filling. Marley stared at the ceiling, heart steady but purposeful. He'd prayed about this, not once, but often. He didn't want to rush, but he also didn't want to hide behind caution when clarity had come. "Naomi," he said. "Yeah, there's something I want to ask you, and I want to ask it right." Her voice sharpened just slightly, attentive. "Okay." Marley took a breath, not nervous, just intentional. "I've really appreciated how we've taken our time. How honest this has been. I don't feel confused anymore. I feel grounded." She was quiet now, listening. I care about you, he continued. Not just in theory. Not just a little, and I want to be intentional and sincere with you. Would you be my girlfriend? The pause that followed wasn't heavy, it was full. Yes, Naomi said, smiling. I was hoping you'd ask. Marley exhaled, laughter soft and relieved. Yes, she repeated. I feel safe with you, Marley. And seen. They stayed on the phone a little longer after that, smiling into the dark, letting the moment land without rushing past it. When they finally said goodnight, it felt different, not louder, not grander, just sure. Marley set his phone down and whispered a quiet thank you to God. Not for speed, not for perfection, but for a love that had grown patiently, rooted in faith, carried by consistency, and spoken out loud when the time was right. The next week, Marley did something that felt both new and deeply intentional. He invited Naomi out on a real date. Not a walk. Not a phone call. Not the park. Dinner. He asked her one evening after work, voice steady but warm. I'd like to take you out properly. Dinner. Just us. Naomi smiled on the other end of the line. I'd like that. He chose one of the quieter restaurants in Gilbert, the kind of place where conversations weren't rushed and the lighting encouraged you to linger. Marley arrived early, of course. Jacket pressed. Hands clean. Posture calm but expectant. He prayed briefly in the car before going in, not for perfection, just presence. When Naomi walked in, the room seemed to recalibrate. She paused just inside the doorway, scanning the space, her eyes landing on Marley almost immediately. Her smile came easily, unforced, and Marley stood without thinking, chair legs whispering against the floor. She wore a simple dress, soft fabric that moved when she did, her hair styled but not stiff, as if she wanted to feel like herself rather than a version of herself. You look beautiful, Marley said, his voice low but certain. Naomi smiled, a faint pink touching her cheeks. You're very handsome yourself, she said, and meant it. They sat, the candle between them casting a gentle glow that softened the lines of their faces. Menus were opened, then mostly forgotten as they talked, first about the day, then about the week, then about nothing in particular at all. Naomi traced the edge of her glass as she laughed, her eyes bright. Marley listened the way he always did, fully, like every word deserved space. When the food arrived, the scent alone slowed them down, warm bread, herbs, something citrusy drifting up from Naomi's plate. They ate deliberately, savoring each bite, sharing tastes back and forth without hesitation. This is really good, Naomi said, smiling as she set her fork down. Marley nodded. I'm glad. I wanted tonight to feel considered. It does, she replied, meeting his eyes. So do you. The conversation deepened naturally. Naomi spoke about her family, about the weight of responsibility that sometimes came with love. Marley shared stories of the job site, small frustrations, quiet victories, and about his grandmother, his voice softening when he mentioned her. Naomi listened closely, leaning in slightly, as if proximity itself were a form of care. At one point, their hands brushed as they both reached for the bread basket. Neither pulled away. The touch was brief, accidental, but it lingered in the space between them, a quiet acknowledgement of what was growing. Marley felt steady, no rush, no pressure, just the deep sense that this moment was exactly where he was meant to be. When dessert was offered, Naomi laughed softly. I think I'm already full. Marley smiled. Me too. They lingered anyway, talking until the candle burned low and the room thinned out. When they finally stood, Marley walked her to the door, holding it open as the cool night air met them both. Outside, under the soft glow of the streetlights, Naomi turned to him. Thank you, she said. For tonight. For doing this with care. Marley nodded, his voice calm, grounded. You're worth doing things right. She smiled, stepped closer, and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips, warm, intentional, unhurried. Marley closed his eyes for just a second, letting the moment settle. As he watched her walk to her car, he didn't feel the urge to rush after her or say more. What they were building didn't need to be rushed. It had to be honored and preserved. It needed presence and patience. Grandma couldn't wait to meet Naomi. Marley noticed it in the way her eyes lit up every time he mentioned her name, in the extra care she took smoothing the blanket over her legs on Monday evenings, in the questions she pretended were casual, but never were. So, she said one night, drawing the word out with a knowing smile, when are you bringing that young lady by? Marley laughed softly, shaking his head as he set her tea on the side table. You haven't even met her yet, and you're already claiming her. I don't need to meet her to know, Grandma replied. You've been smiling different, and you've been praising more than usual. That part made him pause. She was right. Naomi had put a song back in him, not a loud one, but a steady one. His hymns came easier. His prayers felt fuller. Even the hard days didn't steal his gratitude the way they once had. I want it to be the right time, Marley said. Grandma patted his hand. The right time is when you stop hiding joy like it's fragile. A week later, Marley brought Naomi by. The afternoon sun filtered through the living room curtains, warming the small space with a familiar glow. Grandma sat upright in her chair, posture alert despite her frailty, eyes sharp with anticipation. When Naomi stepped inside, her smile gentle and respectful, the room seemed to soften. "Well," Grandma said, studying her carefully, "you must be Naomi." "Yes, ma'am," Naomi replied warmly. "It's so nice to finally meet you." She didn't rush. She didn't overwhelm. She moved closer, took Grandma's hand with care, and met her gaze without hesitation. "I've heard so much about you," Naomi said. "Only the good parts, I hope," Grandma teased. Naomi laughed softly. "All of them." They talked easily about Naomi's family, her move, the pantry, the park. Grandma listened closely, nodding, asking just enough to learn what she needed to know. Marley watched from across the room, heart full, realizing he'd never seen two people connect so naturally across generations. At one point, Grandma looked from Naomi to Marley and smiled. "You've been taking good care of my boy," she said. Naomi squeezed Grandma's hand gently. "He takes good care of others. I just get to witness it." Later, as Naomi helped straighten a throw pillow and Marley walked her to the door, Grandma called out softly, "Marley." "Yes, ma'am?" She smiled, eyes shining. "She's good for you." Marley nodded, emotion thick in his chest. "I know." As Naomi stepped into the sunlight and turned back to wave, Marley felt it again, that quiet certainty. The smile on his face. The praise on his tongue. The gratitude in his spirit. This wasn't just happiness. It was alignment. The church members took to Naomi in little time. It happened so naturally that neither she nor Marley could point to a single moment when she stopped being a guest and started being expected. By the second Sunday, there was already a place for her, right beside Marley, 2 rows from the back. Someone always shifted over before she arrived, a quiet, unspoken agreement that her seat was reserved. Sunday after Sunday, Naomi slid into that pew as if she'd always belonged there. Ushers greeted her by name. Women leaned in to hug her during the passing of the peace. Children waved when they spotted her. Marley watched it all with quiet amazement. He had spent years being known as steady and dependable, but Naomi had been received. If she arrived even a few minutes late, the questions began. "Is Naomi okay? Did she get caught up at the pantry? We saved her seat." Marley would smile, shaking his head gently. "She's on her way." And she always was. Naomi met the attention with grace, never flustered, never overstated. She listened more than she spoke, served where help was needed, and joined in worship with a sincerity that invited others in rather than drawing focus to herself. One Sunday, as the final hymn swelled, Marley felt Naomi's hand rest lightly against his arm. Not clinging, just present, grounded. After service, the pastor smiled as they walked past. "You two look right at home." Naomi glanced at Marley, amused. "I think I've been adopted." Marley chuckled. "That happens fast around here." The church had always known Marley as faithful. Now they knew Naomi as family. And in the quiet way that only real community does, they affirmed what Marley had already felt in his spirit. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't accidental. It was belonging, earned not by words but by consistency, kindness, and a shared walk of faith that kept drawing them back to the same pew week after week. Marley knew the time had come. Not in a rushed, sweeping sense, but in the same quiet certainty that had guided him all along. The kind of knowing that settled deep beyond emotion, beyond excitement. Naomi was no longer simply his girlfriend. She was woven into the fabric of his life. They had built something real. Countless hours were spent walking together, sometimes through the park, sometimes through scripture, reading the word aloud and sitting with it until it spoke to both of them. They served side by side at the local food pantry, hands moving in rhythm as they packed bags, greeted families, and prayed softly when someone asked for hope instead of groceries. Their nights ended the same way most evenings now, tucked into their own beds, phones pressed to their ears, voices lowered, offering encouragement instead of entertainment. "Did you rest today? I'm proud of you. Let's pray before we sleep." Those calls didn't excite the world, but they anchored them. And Mondays belonged to Grandma now. Naomi came willingly, never asked, never rushed. She wiped counters, folded laundry, stirred pots while Marley listened to stories he'd heard 100 times but loved hearing again. Grandma laughed more on those nights, her voice stronger somehow, her eyes brighter as she watched the two of them move together in that small house like it was already shared. "You two act married already," Grandma teased once. Naomi smiled, Marley's hand warm in hers. That was when Marley understood. Marriage wasn't a leap into the unknown. It was the next faithful step. One evening, as they sat side by side after a long day, Bible closed, hands still joined, Marley looked at Naomi and felt peace instead of fear. "I don't just want to walk with you," he said quietly. "I want to build a life with you." Naomi met his gaze, eyes steady, heart open. The proposal hadn't happened yet. But the decision had. And Marley knew, just as clearly as he'd ever known anything, that loving Naomi as his wife would not be a departure from his faith. It would be its fulfillment. 2 Sundays later, Marley made the calls. He didn't explain much, just enough to ensure they would come. His family, spread across nearby towns, heard the steadiness in his voice and didn't ask questions. Naomi's family, those who lived close enough to attend, agreed easily, sensing that this invitation carried more weight than usual. That Sunday, the church was already marked on the calendar as a special day, a community and guest service. The sanctuary buzzed with unfamiliar faces, extra chairs lining the walls, the sound of greetings overlapping in a way that felt celebratory rather than chaotic. But Marley knew something no one else did. He had met quietly with the pastor earlier that week. No theatrics. No surprises for Naomi beyond the moment itself. Just a clear, respectful intention. "I want to do this the right way," Marley had said. "Before God. Before our families. Before our church." The pastor had nodded, understanding immediately. "Then we'll make space for it." That morning, Marley arrived early, heart calm but purposeful. He greeted his family as they filtered in, handshakes, hugs, knowing smiles. Naomi's family arrived shortly after, warm and welcoming, already blending easily with the congregation. Naomi herself noticed the crowd, but didn't question it, squeezing Marley's hand with a playful whisper. "Your church is really full today." He smiled. "It is." They sat together in their usual pew. Naomi radiant in her quiet way, Marley steady beside her, his Bible open though he barely registered the words on the page. Every hymn felt heavier with meaning. Every prayer seemed to echo longer than usual. As the service drew to a close, the pastor returned to the pulpit instead of offering the usual dismissal. "Before we go," he said, smiling knowingly, "today truly is a day for community and for honoring what God builds when faith, love, and intention walk together." Naomi shifted slightly, confused but attentive. The pastor looked toward Marley. "Marley, would you come forward?" A hush fell over the room. Marley stood, legs steady, heart full. He turned to Naomi first, taking her hand gently. "Come with me," he said softly. Understanding dawned slowly across her face, not panic, not fear, just awe. They walked to the front together. Marley turned to face the congregation, then back to Naomi. He took a breath, grounding himself not in nerves but in certainty. "Naomi," he began, voice clear, "you have walked with me in faith, in service, and in love. You've shown me what partnership looks like, not just in words but in daily life." He glanced briefly at the families seated behind them, then back at her. "Before God, before our church, and before those who love us, I want to make my intention known." The room was still. "I am asking for your hand in marriage," Marley said. "And I am committing my life to loving you, serving with you, and walking with you faithfully." Naomi's eyes filled, her hand tightening around his. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, steady and sure. "Yes." The church erupted, not in noise alone but in joy. Applause, laughter, quiet tears. Naomi's family stood, Marley's family beaming, the pastor smiling wide as he stepped forward in prayer. As Marley rested his forehead briefly against Naomi's, gratitude surged through him. As the applause softened and the final prayer was spoken, Marley stood beside Naomi with a peace that settled deeper than joy. Their hands were still joined, their families close, their church surrounding them like a witness to something sacred that had been forming long before this moment. This was not the end of their story. It was the confirmation of a path already being walked, step by step, prayer by prayer, act of service by act of service. Marley hadn't chased love or forced timing. Naomi hadn't demanded certainty before faith had room to speak. Together, they had trusted God enough to let love unfold as it was meant to. As the congregation began to move and voices filled the sanctuary again, the words echoed in Marley's heart, words that had guided him through waiting, doubt, and hope, and now stood as a promise over their future. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. And hand in hand, with faith as their foundation, Marley and Naomi stepped forward, confident that the God who had ordered their meeting would also faithfully guide every step that followed. Thank you for spending this moment with me on Threads of Grace. As you go, remember, God's timing is best and grace isn't something you chase. It's something you walk in. May you be covered, guided, and gently reminded that God is present in every thread of your story. Whatever season you're in, trust that God is still weaving together every part of your life. Before you leave, like, subscribe, and leave someone an assuring comment or encouragement below. Your voice matters and will help to build up this community of believers. Until next time, keep walking in grace.